meetup here in San Francisco. And this is actually one of our first design-orientated type of events. And we're probably going to have more of these events in the future based on the number of, I guess, like speakers that we get. And so actually, our sister meetup is AirCV as well as blockchain meetups. So we can get into exactly how you can find the other ones later. So the way that we typically run our panels is that we first have a fireside chat and then followed by a panel with all three of the speakers to get a sense more about, let's say, design. And today's topic is something that is very dear to my heart, primarily because, so I actually spent 2 years of my life as a product designer and product manager in London for an events app startup called Revel. And during that time, I mean, basically in a 13-person team as a product manager, and we didn't have a formal designer on the team. Basically, I have fond memories of spending 2 to 3 weeks of my life designing some filters and sorts. So there's a lot of things that go into design. And we have some really extraordinary people to talk about that today. And so after this event, we have a lot of food out in the back, and it's courtesies of the UC Extension. Thank you, Fred, and his team for providing the space as well as the refreshments. So hopefully we'll be back here for future events too. And before I start, can I get a show of hands on who has design experience or would consider themselves a professional designer in this room? Okay, cool, awesome. And I guess like everyone else, do you guys mostly just have an interest in design or want to get in the field? I mean, for those who are just interested or want to get into the field, can you show of hands as well? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's always good to kind of get a sense of the audience and what your guys' expectations are kind of coming in as well. So, all right. So right now we're going to go into our first speaker, the first fireside chat. Can I welcome Meenakshi Mukherjee to sit right over here. Meenakshi is actually the first day on the job right now with Macy's, right? After 5 years with McAfee. So she's a UX design, feel free to take a seat right here. She's a UX design leader with experience launching award-winning designs for global audiences. Prior to Macy's, she's led design teams at McAfee on security and privacy, two huge topics in today's world. Before McAfee, she was a principal designer with Intel Security, as well as part of teams on PayPal, Walmart, Redbricks Media. And she also teaches here at the UC Extension and was really instrumental in founding their 2-year professional program on UX design. So can we have a show of hands for All right, so first question is, how did you get into the field, and what's your background?
So I was not born a UX designer. I have a background in computer science, so I have an undergrad in computer science. I also did master's in computer science in India, and I didn't like coding much. It took so many hours just to get the code running, and then I realized that I just missed out on a full stop or whatever that was. And so I was looking for something that was more, related to humans, right? I mean, I could meet people. Coding was very lonely. So I went to the iSchool in Berkeley. I did my master's in information science, or whatever they have. It's a new course which has been running for the last 10 years. It's been doing awesome. And that's when I got introduced to user experience design. I decided to become a UI designer versus a user researcher. Even though I wanted to be with people and talk to people, I think user research is very, very close to people. You really have to keep on talking and asking questions. So you really have to have that psychology frame of mind. And me coming from an engineering background, I was like, not too much, keep the distance. It's okay. So that the sweet spot between, UI design, where engineering, the background, technology, but you also have this users in mind, and so that's what I became a UX designer.
Got it. And what was your first job as a designer? I mean, and did you I guess like were an engineer before that, and then what was that kind of turning point?
The first job as a UX designer, I think I was really lucky to get summer internship in Berkeley. It was a project where where they had the company was in Palo Alto, CommerceNet, and it was giving them the basically investing in the company, and the whole project was about students being able to showcase their projects and get donations for it. So,
oh, really? Okay.
And it's called the Big Ideas in Berkeley. It's still continuing, and that's one of the big ways in which students who have good ideas project their ideas, and they have sponsors sponsoring for them. So the idea was Big Ideas at Berkeley. When I joined the company, whatever the project was, they only had a one-pager website. It was like, oh, this is what we do. Big Ideas at Berkeley, they have nothing else to do. This is what we do. We don't have a website, nothing. And I was their first UI designer. I was very theoretical designer at that point of time. Like, I had just learned what is UX design, no experience. And then we had the team in Berkeley who we were designing for, the CommerceNet people who were actually investing, and there was the finance guys who were creating the back end in Hawaii. And I was the sole designer, basically doing the project management in a way, and also designing for them. So it was a lot of responsibility, and I think it just fell on me to do everything right. And I just went by the books of user-centered design, and this is what the steps you should need to do. And I think that was the most successful project because it got launched and it stayed really well for many years. In fact, it got really good reviews. Somebody said that, hey, this website is really good, and I felt very proud. So it was my first one, and that kind of gave the baseline for the next job, so I could showcase that and then get the next job. So yeah, that was really good.
Got it. So it started with that, and you just kept on building on top of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, so you spent close to 5 years at McAfee, right? So how do you design for privacy and security?
Designing for privacy and security is very tricky because it is very dependent on engineering side, because we, as the technical people, they come up with new technologies and say, this is really cool. This is what we are going to launch in our next release, and this is a new feature. If you go and ask the users, they don't even know the difference between privacy and security. So they're like, just keep us safe. We just want to be safe. But do you know what's the difference between security and privacy? What do you guys really do? I mean, I don't know what you guys do. And here, when I talk to the engineers, it's an engineering-led company. They're like, oh, we have this cool feature which will show you, the spoofing. And you ask the users, like, what's spoofing? So
what is spoofing, actually, for people who don't know in the room? I know what it is because I used to work on a game that actually shooters spoofed around. It's Pokemon Go and Niantic, actually.
So go ahead, tell me what's spoofing.
So spoofing is when a user fakes their GPS location or any kind of location, right? And it has, basically, let's say you have a movie pass, right? You know how you have to be within like a certain distance in order to check in? Well, you can just spoof there and then get your ticket. Same thing with Pokemon Go and Ingress. It just means that people go around, mess up your games and attack you from nowhere. But anyways, those are kind of more, I guess, like benign versions of spoofing. I'm sure there's more malicious.
Yeah, so if you're sitting in a Starbucks and you can get spoofed because somebody else might be like hacking into your system.
So there you go, yeah.
And then a new technology comes out where this engineering guy comes and says that we can tell you all the spoofing which happened in the close by areas of other Starbucks over the last 3 days. I hear that, but when I see research, they don't even know what's spoofing, and I'm like, if you put that technology in the system, do you even know if the user is going to use it? And so that's the tricky part for designing for security or privacy is it's something that the users don't understand, but as a company, you need to be able to convey the value prop to the users, and they need to understand so that they are going to use you as part of their lives. So for the business, it's critical that you sell the value prop to the users. And if they downloaded you and they don't know what you do, they generally don't want any notifications from you and stuff like that. So they stay in the background. If you stay in the background and you haven't sent any notifications or anything, in a week they're like, I don't even know what this app does.
Right.
Just
and that's very
uninstall
difficult with an invisible product that you
I call it designing for the invisible app.
Right.
It's a pretty interesting challenge to be in the middle understanding the user needs and the technology and making it work for the business.
Right. I mean, that's a very fascinating, I guess, like problem to solve, because I feel like 80% of the apps here in the Valley is more about getting your attention, right? It's like here's a notification here and there, but for you, it's like it's really running in the background. Yet you still have to show the value essentially bringing.
I think notification. That's where I think all users like us, we are getting bored with notification. It's not working anymore, so we have to come up with something new to get the attention rather than notification.
What's an example of that? I'm pretty curious.
For getting the attention
without notifications.
That's the code we have to crack, right?
Yeah.
It's still not cracked yet as to how do you got the user to download the app the first time because there was a need to.
That's right.
And then they left, but then how do you bring them back in? It's not Facebook, it's not Netflix, it's not that they know what the app is about, or if they use it for one time, they're not going to come back again. How do you make them come back? So that's the tricky part.
Got it. Okay. Well, so moving a little bit away from that side. So after 5 years at McAfee, what made you, switch into a new job with Macy's? Congrats, by the way, on that.
Thank you.
Thursday.
So I've been there for 5 years now. So we currently launched the complete redesign of the McAfee Mobile Security app.
Right.
And then I was looking for something new. So I've been there for 5 years, worked on their e-commerce side, worked on their app side, and so kind of worked on most of the products. And so it was time to see something different.
Got it. Well, we should definitely invite you back, after a couple quarters and just kind of see how you're doing and everything. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. All right. Next, we have Carina, Ngai. There we go. Awesome. So Carina is a product design lead for Coursera. How many people in this room have heard of it or have actually used it?
Wow.
Okay.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
there you go. So pretty much everybody knows about it, and actually I'm a pretty hardcore user as well. Carina thrives in chaos. You can probably explain that in a bit as well, especially when things are not very well defined, because with ambiguity comes possibilities and great responsibilities. She's on a quest to always define the feature of X, always iterating, designing, the design research process. For Coursera, she's the product and UX design lead with Blippar, the AR product app, Google, Netflix, Samsung, and Adobe. I'm pretty sure we left off like a couple of names like Microsoft or something. She's also active in the design community and often speaks at design research, interaction design, and inclusive design at conferences such as IXD, UX Summit, and South by Southwest. Please give a round of applause for Carina. So, first off, what's your background? What would you like to tell the audience about yourself? And I also noticed that you have a neuroscience background.
Yes. So I was not a trained designer, and I actually think designers from a very different background can bring in so much into design. I had an undergraduate degree in neuroscience because I was on my way to med school. I was going to be a doctor like all the Asian family wants us to be. And it turned out that I'm actually a very clumsy researcher, and I make a lot of mistakes during the experiment. Not mistake, but it's just like I always try to find ways to do better.
Right.
And my professor actually told me that you might as well be a designer because you keep designing my experiment. You can't do that. You have to follow the protocol.
Right.
And that's the first time I heard, oh, a designer, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. Maybe that's something I can pursue.
It's like, are you telling me there's actually a job that lets you design these processes? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually makes me a very analytical designer, having a science background. And being a scientist, we were always taught to learn things from stories, facts, and evidence. Like, this is how your body works. This is how your cell works. But in design, it's completely open-ended.
Right.
And the first project I was so stumbled upon was my professor gave me a project and said, design a cool poster. And I actually had to go back to her and say, what do you mean by cool? I don't understand it. Define cool. And she said, well, you have to tell me what is cool. Because
cool.
designer needs to tell me what is cool, and I'll tell you whether or not it's cool. So that's the first time I understand, okay, this is what design is about. And it's very frightening because you have to put your work up on the wall and let everyone criticize it and let everyone give you feedback, and you just kind of get used to that process.
Yeah. So how did that poster turn out? I'm just pretty curious. Did what was the process? Where did you get there?
It was an interesting process. I started. My first job was actually at IT admin, which is completely irrelevant, but actually not.
Yeah.
Because I was fixing people's computer on Rodale Drive, and it's a very prestigious zip code, but all these people are really snobby brokers, and they say, you need to fix my computer now or I'm gonna lose money.
Right.
So I need to have a lot of sympathy. I have to understand how to work with people, and actually helps me to become a better designer. There's always things that doesn't really quite relate or connect the dots until you reach a place where you can think back and you see where the relevant threads are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure developing empathy for people complaining about them losing money, rich people losing money. But anyways, so being a very good interviewer beforehand, I LinkedIn stalked you, and you have obviously a very wide breadth of experience from Netflix, Google, Samsung, Microsoft, but also Blippar and Coursera, smaller teams. What would you say are some of the biggest differences, from a design standpoint, of working in large corporations versus smaller companies?
Yeah, so when I started off being a designer, I was lucky enough to be recruited by big companies, and in that process, I learned a lot about the process. What is the optimal way to work with product manager? What is the best way to ship a product? What is the best way to design? What tools to use? A lot of the very practical stuff I was able to learn. So a lot of the process, just absorbing everything and learning how to work with the teams. And the problem they give you is usually very defined. Like, okay, we're going to launch this feature in Photoshop. How do you just design the flow for that?
Yeah.
It's very defined. When I go to smaller companies such as Blippar, which is an augmented reality company, everything was up in the air.
Right.
Like the problem, they don't even know what the problem is. They want me to find out, or they want a design team to figure out. So
kind of like that poster example, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very ambiguous. But to me, when things are that ambiguous, it gives me a chance to be creative.
Right.
It gives me a chance to design the design process and understanding. Okay, do we have a user? Oh, everyone is a user now. What do we do? So it's a really interesting journey and path to find out what the company needs, because they don't really know.
Right.
And yes, our task is to design a good product to launch, but behind it, there's a lot of mysteriousness of, the smaller company couldn't figure out that. And that's why I find it very intriguing.
Right, okay. Well, speaking of process, a lot of people have heard, 0 to 1, right? Thanks to Peter Thiel. But before that, you need kind of 0 to MVP in order to get to that one customer or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through, that process of getting from 0 to MVP?
Yes.
And of course, it depends on the context. I'm generalizing right now.
Right, of course. So everyone knows what's MVP and what 0 means? Lots of head nods, okay. So 0 to MVP meaning you have to launch the very first draft of the product, which I've done many times throughout my career. And it's very exciting because we don't know what is going to be launched, and even though if people have an idea in their head, whatever we launch is just completely different and deviated. And that was just a process of discovery. And this is through research, this is through talking to people, launching little prototypes, asking people if that makes sense. And usually we just have to pivot a lot, and pivot it up to a point where it's just completely unrecognized from the original vision.
Right, yeah.
So, and for the whole team to embrace this change, it's actually pretty incredible. And for designers to be able to actually launch something that we know this is not ideal, but let's just see how it works and be able to do that, it's also pretty amazing.
Got it. And I'm sure, in your long career as a designer, it hasn't been completely, just like, smooth sailing, right? Well, what has been, some of the biggest challenges or setbacks that you've experienced so far?
I think Blippar was an interesting example. I was in this AR company for a while. It's extremely rewarding, and it's also extremely frustrating because design team also has their view of how products should work, and the founder may also have a vision where he thinks, maybe he was thinking the world is a visual Wikipedia. When you take up your mobile phone, it tells you all the data and information, and it's like a visual Wikipedia. And we didn't believe it, and we launched a little study, and it turned out that people were overwhelmed by information, and they just don't want to see more information. So how do we fix this problem? And when people think about AR, they also think about visual effects and some wow factors.
Right.
This is something really cool. And it works fine with an advertising campaign, but when it comes to utility, people don't use AR for utility per se.
Right, not yet.
So, not yet, and we were trying to crack that. So for me to demonstrate to the founder and the team, the C-level, that people just aren't really interested in information that way.
Yeah.
I had to secretly launch a research project and kind of secretly get blessing from multiple senior level people and say, can I just have enough budget so I can comp my participants? And then I would have to like go off my way and deliver these type of results to them. And the result was very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I believe that AR cannot just tailor to a group of people. We don't really have a user. We should design for human. It's not really just users. So I purposely interviewed a group of people that are legally blind, and I did a knowledge
really?
exchange to them. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was like the user base, they think AR user needs to be teens because it's very hip, it's very cool. And I said, fine, teen. And I'm gonna interview blind teens. So I interviewed like 25 of them. It's like in a focus group format.
Okay.
And through them, it's just so much information I was able to learn. The information hierarchy of how information needs to be displayed on your phone needs to be so different.
Yeah.
For example, how many of you guys know that blind people actually take selfies and they have Instagram accounts and they use it for social purpose? And the way they use phone is a bit different than us, but the motivation and intent is completely the same. So when we see it from a non-visual point of view, the product itself can improve dramatically just from that standpoint.
So actually, I mean, how did you go about in, I guess, like doing the user test for that? What were some of the learnings from that?
Some of the learnings was, for example, when people are doing these, we call them blipping, because Blippar needs everything to be blipping, is the verb. I need to blip this and blip that, and I want to see a blip. As you're blipping, you actually forget, user is actually in a very vulnerable position, and I'm just holding on my phone and scanning my environment. People can just attack me, or when they give me a scenario of, I am traveling in a new city and I want to see what's cool around me doing this, it forgot the user is actually very vulnerable.
Right, yeah.
And it was actually this blind group of users that gives me that insight, because they were talking a lot about safety. They were talking a lot about, I gave them a scenario. If you have a magical device and you're in this new city, what do you want this device to tell you? And yes, they say, I want to know about information about restaurants and cool stuff, but I also want to know who's walking towards me.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a man or a woman, or how old are they? Are they going to attack me? A lot of these things that we take it for granted, and it really serves us up when we have this type of inclusive design.
Right, and I love that question actually, right? Because you didn't ask, hey, how would you use this AR app or this, this new product, right? It's more like if you had just this magical device, that tells you about the city.
Yes.
What would you be afraid of, or what would you do with it?
Yes,
Very
and that's the art
Yeah.
of asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe, as a good designer, it's not just about designing things; it's about asking the right questions. And I strongly believe that it is, thinking out of the box is so cliche. Everyone can think out of the box. But where is the box, right? That is the question the designer can help to frame.
Right.
And if you can ask the right question, people will answer it properly.
Great. Well, with that, actually, I'm sure we're going to be digging further into that. But thank you so much for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Carina. Next, we have Alyssa. Great. Alyssa is a design lead at PlayStation. How many of people here are gamers or have a PS4? Okay, good stuff. So definitely. Oh, this mic's free. I already have one too. So Alyssa is actually a third-generation psychologist turned UX designer. We have a lot of kind of non-traditional type of designers in the room, which is pretty awesome. She discovered from her passion for technology while completing her dissertation on Facebook's effect on self-esteem of adolescent women. We're definitely going to dig into that. Currently, she is leading the design of social experiences at Sony PlayStation. Before that, she was the head of UX at ThreadUp, and also works on design teams at Google, SAP, and Top Header. So please give a round of applause to. So obviously we'll get into dissertation in a bit, but I mean I noticed that you have pretty much like every degree possible for psychology, like bachelor, master's, doctorate, and you're also a third-generation psychologist.
Yes.
Tell me more about that, and how did that influence your UX career?
Well, it started with my mother.
Okay, yeah.
Psychology joke for any other psychology.
That's right.
Actually, it started with my father. He was a psychologist.
Even better.
And his father was a psychologist as well. He was one of the very first psychologists in the Miami-Dade, South Florida area. And I became interested in psychology, I think I was telling someone earlier tonight, because I thought it was kind of an easy major. I thought it kind of made sense. Well, but after that, to be fully honest, I wasn't totally sure what I was going to do with my life.
Right.
And a lot of people who don't know what they're going to do with their lives just keep going to school. So I went to school for another 5 years.
Yeah.
I got my master's and my doctorate in psychology.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you, I mean, tell me about the dissertation. This was during your PhD, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Okay.
So I went to graduate school in the Bay Area, and that was a period of time where technology was really booming. Facebook was just making their first UX research hires. I think when I talked to them, they only had 4 people on the team. And I kind of knew that I wanted to tailor my dissertation to be something that could potentially get me a job in technology.
Right, yeah.
So I picked what was sort of hot at that moment, which was social networking. So when I began writing my dissertation, MySpace was actually the top social networking site. And the numbers were changing so rapidly every single month. I had to go in and really just update things, update my numbers about usage,
Right.
and who was using what for what, and then news feed came, and I talked to my chair, and I was like, at some point, we just gotta cut it off. Like, these sites are changing so fast, like, this number is what it is, and we're just gonna put at this date.
Right, okay. So your dissertation is 80 pages long, right?
Yes.
Can you give us the abstract of that?
Yes, so time spent on social networking sites for adolescent girls was not at all correlated with self-esteem or overall well-being. The only factor that I found that did contribute to self-esteem and well-being was the adolescent girl's perception of male to female friends that she had.
Okay.
More male friends, more self-esteem, at least in this study. Please, that is just a correlation, no causation. Please don't put me on the record for that. Don't put me
Don't retweet that.
Bad tweet.
So, changing gears a little bit, what are you up to these days with at PlayStation? And has your psychology background is assisting with your role there?
Yeah, so I work on the PlayStation console. I'm currently leading a design team and I oversee all social features for PlayStation. So all of our community features. If any of you have ever sent someone a message or done voice chat while you're playing a game or updated your profile, those are all the topics that I am working on.
Got it. And do you conduct user studies, or is it more of a quantitative approach to learning about users?
So our research team we're all under the design bucket, but we do have centralized research at PlayStation, and their research methodology sort of depends on the question at hand. So a lot of what the work I'm doing right now is really forward-facing and predicting the future. So we very much look at current usage behaviors, but we're also doing a lot of user interviews.
I see. And how does a user interview for PlayStation social features look like?
That's a good question. I'm not necessarily the one conducting it, but it's usually around, we've got a usability lab filled with PlayStations, we've got someone fire it up, and we usually use it as a visual stimulus while we're asking them questions just about their life and their gaming behavior.
Oh, I see.
And sort of using the PlayStation as just something there that they can also sort of refer to, while we're also asking a line of questioning to sort of delve at, well, what if it was like this, or why are you hiring that product instead of our product for this particular
it sounds like a pretty fun time as well for the user to come in for a couple hours and also play some games too.
Yeah, and they get some money or some PlayStation swag. It's really win-win for everybody.
Good stuff. And I'm sure you can hire some of these guys for the test as well, since we have some gamers in the room. Great. Anyway, so thank you so much, Alyssa. Let's give a round of applause. Now we're going to be bringing everybody back for basically the entire panel.
Awesome.
Yeah, keep the exactly where you are. And now Sharon, Carina. So now that we've gotten a better sense of who you are, your backgrounds, and everything, we're going to jump more into a profession and industry-wide type of discussion. And the first question that I will ask is something that is really, really common, right? Which is UI versus UX. I feel like some people kind of like mix the two together. What are your thoughts around that? I mean, how do you define it?
One person mentioned UI in their Fireside chat, so I think she should be the one to answer.
When at that time UI was there was no UX.
Right.
So it was UI and visual design, and then comes in UX, and then the UX becomes the prevalent term used for everything, right? So UX designer, UX content writer, and so now it's very difficult to distinguish what's UX. So the way I see it, it's in a company, UX designers and UI designers don't coexist.
Interesting.
Right?
Why do you say that?
So it's either you have a UX designer or a UI designer. So
Okay.
basically they are doing the same job.
Okay.
So there is no distinction in
I
what
see. Got it.
The interaction designer will be thinking about the flows, the logic, the end-to-end experience.
Mhm.
Whereas UX designer will also be
Right.
thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Either you have that and then you have a visual designer, or if you don't have that, then the same person is wearing all the hats and doing that.
Got
The
it.
wireframes, the flows, as well as making things beautiful.
Mhm.
So the end-to-end. So that's the way I see the difference.
Got it. Yeah, really, really good definition, actually. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I see UI as just really one small discipline under UX. I don't like really to label all these terms, but because it's kind of a trend. Like one time we called them UX, and then later we heard product design, and
Right.
you just have all these different terms, but it just means the same thing. And UI, I think, is a very limited description of what UX designer can really do. And design actually embraces a whole bigger, broader aspect of things. It's like how things work. Can you study people's behavior to understand it? Is there another group of user we didn't see? But UI is strictly on how things lay out, how things work on a program, on the device, and it's very limiting.
I completely agree with what they said. I think the whole battle of UI versus UX kind of feels like an internal one. It's like, no, we're not this, we're that. But I think what everyone else said, it's sort of how the rest of the world labels us, and it's just
Right.
their shorthand. But at the end of the day, I think we're all kind of doing the same things within
That's
our
right.
companies.
Yeah.
Like I know at PlayStation, we don't have a UI designer and a UX designer. We're all just UX designers.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, now that we have gotten that out of the way, right? So all of you have a pretty wide breadth of experience in both enterprise as well as consumer. What are some of the biggest differences in terms of design from these two different audiences?
I'll start. For me, enterprise users seemed a lot more forgiving and accepting if something wasn't necessarily flawless.
Yeah.
And they were really grateful if you even went in there and wanted to improve anything, especially if it was a tool that they were just used to and felt like it was part of their job to deal with.
Mhm.
I think they were often just really flattered that someone would want to come in and even attempt to improve it.
Yeah, I think the notion of B2B is more boring. It's somewhat true, but I'm working in a project right now that is for enterprise, and it's super interesting because how business users use the product is completely different. Their intents and their behavior is very influenced by the company's choices. So that in that aspect, it's easier to do research. It's easier to figure out what they really want or how can we tailor the product towards them. Where I do agree that consumers are a lot more demanding, they're less tolerant, they're not patient, if your app is not good enough, they delete it right away. So you have to really be on point.
For me, the difference between enterprise and consumer is for enterprise, it's more you're designing for a captive audience. They have no option other than use that product. So they hope that you make it better. If they don't make it better, you're still using it because the company went for that product. And the way we gauge enterprise products is by features.
Right.
Oh, this enterprise product has 5 features, that one has 6, and so the sales team goes with that. The people who actually buy that go with that, saying that I'm paying this much amount for this number of features versus that number of features. And the people who pay the money for it are not really using that product. Versus for the the consumer, they are not captive audience. They don't like your product. They will not use it, and the business goes down. So I think the enterprise companies are now you will see a trend that's coming up because now the enterprise design is also becoming better, and that's because the big companies like Google, Microsoft, who had consumer products before are getting into enterprise, and so they're basically using the same designers for both. And so their designs are becoming much better. So the other enterprise companies who were there with bad designs are now competing with these people, and they have to make the designs better. And so
so it's actually kind of lifting the entire industry.
Now the enterprise designs are also becoming better. And to the point that enterprise is boring, I think it is boring in terms of visual design, but for problem solving, I think enterprise has got very complicated products to solve, and very complicated problems to solve. So the problems are very complicated. The UI is all like drop-down boxes, drop-downs or boxes or Excel spreadsheets, right?
That's right.
But it's not as beautiful as the mobile apps would be. But the problems that they're solving are really complicated.
Got it. And speaking of problem solving, I mean, what are some of the biggest problems that you're either currently solving, or in your case, actually that that you used to solve perhaps at McAfee?
So I can talk about the problems that you're facing as a whole. I feel that there are these technologies which have come up, like augmented reality, voice, UI, and we have the tools, and we haven't yet hit upon how to use them. So it's like, it's almost like gimmicks. I was talking to the team before, it's like, we have the fun part, you point something, you see augmented reality, you play the games, you have these cool glasses, a smart glass, but it's not really working because we're not really solving any problem for them. It's like, we have the technology, let's just use it. Or even in smart glasses, I'm not really convinced that the interaction that they came up with, like it's more of a touch screen. That's a touch screen you touch on a phone, right? So that shouldn't be the interaction on a glass. It should be something different, right? So I understand that they haven't really come up with something cool, and they should. But the technology is there, and we are not really solving a problem for it. So if you're not really solving a user's problem, you're always going to use it anyway.
That sounds like a mentality that a lot of I think Valley, I guess, like application companies and companies. That's a mindset basically. It's like there's a cool technology, and let's just deploy it and see what happens, right? Without really thinking about the problem.
I sometimes think that we don't just design for problems to solve problems. We also design for opportunities.